Blood matted the bobcat cub's tiny paw as its desperate mother dragged it across the scorching highway, directly into the path of Mike Collins's 18-wheeler. The weathered truck driver's split-second decision would not only determine the Wild family's fate, but unexpectedly shatter the protective shell he'd built around his heart since losing his wife. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The relentless Arizona sun beat down on Highway 40, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Mike Collins wiped the sweat from his brow as he guided his 18-wheeler through the desert landscape, the rumble of the engine a constant companion on this solitary journey. At 56, Mike had spent more than 3 decades behind the wheel, logging millions of miles across America's highways. His weathered face, creased by years of squinting into the distance, told the story of a man who had seen it all, or so he thought. The CB radio crackled with occasional chatter, but Mike kept to himself. Since losing his wife to cancer 2 years ago, silence had become his preferred companion. The trucking company had offered him shorter routes, ones that would keep him closer to home. But home was just an empty house now. The road, with its ever-changing scenery and constant forward momentum, provided the escape he needed from memories that still cut too deep. As the truck rounded a bend, the landscape opened up to reveal miles of scrubland, dotted with sagebrush and the occasional juniper. The afternoon light cast long shadows, creating a tapestry of gold and amber across the terrain. It was in this moment of natural beauty that Mike spotted something unusual on the road ahead, a movement that seemed out of place against the stillness of the desert. He eased off the accelerator, his trained eyes focusing on the disturbance. Years on the road had taught him to anticipate hazards, debris, stalled vehicles, even the occasional wandering livestock. But what he saw now caused him to grip the steering wheel tighter. There, in the middle of his lane, was a bobcat, and not just any bobcat, but a mother with something clutched in her mouth, dragging it across the asphalt. "Well, I'll be damned," Mike muttered, gently applying the brakes. His massive truck slowed gradually, the weight of its cargo requiring distance to halt safely. As the gap between his vehicle and the animals closed, Mike could make out more details. The mother bobcat, her tawny coat spotted with black rosettes, had her jaws clamped firmly around what appeared to be a piece of rope or vine. At the other end of this natural tether stumbled a small cub, barely able to keep pace with its mother. Mike's heart clenched at the sight. The mother bobcat's determination was evident in every muscle of her sleek body as she pulled her young one across the dangerous expanse of highway. The cub, with its oversized paws and uncertain gait, looked exhausted but trusting, following its mother's lead despite the obvious strain. With practiced precision, Mike brought his truck to a complete stop about 50 yards from the bobcats. He activated his hazard lights, creating a buffer zone that would alert any approaching vehicles to the situation ahead. In his rear-view mirror, he could already see a couple of cars slowing behind him, their drivers likely confused by the sudden traffic stop in the middle of nowhere. The mother bobcat froze at the sound of the air brakes hissing, her golden eyes locking onto the massive vehicle before her. For a moment, time seemed suspended as human and wildcat regarded each other across the divide of species. Mike had encountered plenty of wildlife in his travels, deer, coyotes, even the occasional bear, but something about this mother's desperate journey struck a chord within him. Without thinking, Mike reached for his CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is Lonesome Mike at mile marker 282 on I-40 eastbound. Got a mama bobcat and cub crossing. Traffic stopped. Approach with caution." The responses came quickly, other drivers acknowledging the warning and promising to slow down. The mother bobcat, sensing the momentary reprieve, resumed her urgent task. Mike watched as she struggled to drag her cub across the hot pavement, her movements becoming more labored with each passing second. The cub seemed to be limping, one of its front paws held slightly above the ground as it hobbled forward. "They're injured," Mike realized, speaking the words aloud to the empty cab. The recognition triggered something in him, a memory of another time he'd encountered suffering and had the power to help or harm with his next decision. His wife, Catherine, had always been the one to stop for injured animals on the roadside, to call wildlife services, to wait until help arrived. "Everything deserves a fighting chance, Mike," she'd say. "Even the wild things." Mike's hand moved to the door handle, hesitating. Trucking companies had strict policies about schedules, about unnecessary stops. He was already running behind due to a delay at his last pickup. And what did he know about helping wild animals? They were unpredictable, dangerous even. The rational part of his mind advised him to wait until they crossed, then continue on his way. Nature had its own course. It wasn't his place to intervene. But as he watched the mother bobcat struggling, her determination unwavering despite the odds, something shifted inside Mike. It was as if Catherine was sitting beside him again, her hand on his arm, her voice gentle but firm. "Some things matter more than schedules, Mike." He made his decision. With deliberate movements, Mike secured his truck, grabbed his gloves and the small emergency kit he kept in the cab, and opened the door. The heat hit him like a physical force as he stepped down onto the asphalt, the desert air scorching his lungs. Behind him, a car horn honked impatiently, but Mike paid it no mind. His focus was entirely on the wild mother and her cub, now frozen again at the sight of a human approaching. "Easy now," he murmured, though he knew the animals couldn't understand his words. It was the tone he hoped would convey his intentions. Not a threat, but a helping hand. The mother bobcat's ears flattened against her skull, her body tensing as she prepared to either flee or fight. The cub huddled closer to its mother, its injured paw clearly visible now. Mike stopped at a respectful distance, assessing the situation more fully. The cub's paw was wrapped in what looked like discarded fishing line, cutting into the tender flesh and causing obvious pain. The mother had been trying to drag her young one to safety, away from the dangerous human thoroughfare, but the injury was slowing them down. Behind him, Mike could hear car doors opening, curious onlookers emerging to witness the unfolding drama. Someone shouted something about calling animal control, but Mike knew that in this remote stretch of highway, help would be hours away, hours the injured cub might not have under the merciless desert sun. What happened next would surprise everyone watching, including Mike himself. Mike knelt on the scorching asphalt, his weathered face creased with concentration. Years of handling roadside emergencies had taught him that panic never helped a situation. He reached slowly into his emergency kit and pulled out a bottle of water, a clean rag, and a small pair of wire cutters he kept for minor repairs. "Sir, you shouldn't get that close," a woman's voice called from behind him. "Those are wild animals." Mike didn't turn around. "Yes, ma'am, they surely are," he replied, his voice steady. "But that little one's got fishing line cutting into its paw. Won't make it far in this heat if we don't help." The mother bobcat's amber eyes tracked his every movement, her body tense and ready to spring. Mike had grown up in rural Montana before taking to the roads. He understood wild animals well enough to know both their danger and their desperation. This mother wasn't acting aggressive. She was exhausted, her flanks heaving with exertion, her focus divided between protecting her cub and seeking escape. "I'm just going to help your little one there," Mike said softly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. He wet the rag with water and placed it on the ground, then backed away several feet. The desert heat had dehydrated both animals. Mike could see it in their panting and in the mother's determined yet weakening movements. His hope was simple, that the mother's need for water would momentarily override her fear of humans. A small crowd had gathered now, a half-dozen travelers standing at what they deemed a safe distance, smartphones raised to capture the unusual scene. A middle-aged man in a polo shirt approached Mike. "I called the wildlife authorities," he said, keeping his voice low. "They said they're sending someone, but it could be over an hour." Mike nodded his thanks but didn't take his eyes off the bobcats. "That cub won't last an hour in this heat with that injury." The mother bobcat had noticed the wet cloth. She sniffed the air, detecting the water. Her thirst warring with her caution, she took one tentative step forward, then another. The cub remained where it was, sinking to its belly on the hot pavement, clearly in distress. In that moment, the mother made a decision that seemed to surprise everyone watching. She released her grip on the makeshift leash and approached the wet cloth, her movements stiff with wariness. She sniffed it, then began to lap at the moisture, her need for hydration overcoming her fear. "That's it," Mike murmured. "You take what you need." While the mother drank, Mike inched closer to the cub. The young bobcat watched him with wide, frightened eyes but was too weak to flee. Up close, Mike could see the fishing line had cut deeply into the tender flesh, causing swelling and infection. Acting with the same calm precision he used when fixing his truck under pressure, Mike reached out with the wire cutters. "Easy now, little fella," he whispered. The mother's head snapped up at his movement, a growl rumbling from her throat. Mike froze, the cutters just inches from the cub's injured paw. For several tense heartbeats, he and the mother locked eyes. Something passed between them, not understanding exactly, but a recognition. Mike thought of Catherine again, of how she'd always said animals could sense intentions. "I'm trying to help," Mike said, his voice barely audible. "I promise." As if responding to his words, the mother bobcat looked at her suffering cub, then back at Mike. She took 2 steps backward, maintaining distance but not fleeing, not attacking. Taking this as permission, Mike gently slipped the cutters around the fishing line and snipped. The filament had cut so deeply that it was barely visible amid the swollen flesh. With careful movements, he removed the line, revealing raw, infected tissue beneath. The cub flinched but remained still, as if understanding this momentary pain was necessary. Mike took out a small tube of antibiotic ointment from his first aid kit, something Catherine had insisted he always carry. He squeezed a generous amount onto his finger and, with a touch as light as he could manage, applied it to the cub's wound. "You've done this before," observed a young woman who had ventured closer than the others. Mike shook his head. "Not with wild animals, but my wife." He paused, surprised at how easily her name still caught in his throat after 2 years. "My late wife was always bringing home injured creatures. Taught me a thing or two." The mother bobcat had finished with the water-soaked cloth. She approached her cub, nuzzling it briefly, before resuming her hold on the natural tether. Mike backed away, giving them space. The cub stood, testing its injured paw. It still favored the leg, but seemed able to put more weight on it now that the constricting line was gone. One of the onlookers, an older man in a fishing hat, stepped forward with a bottle of water. "Thought you might want to give them a bit more before they go," he said, offering it to Mike. Mike nodded gratefully, wetting the cloth again and placing it before the bobcats. The mother approached more readily this time, drinking deeply while keeping her eyes fixed on the humans. The cub hobbled forward and joined her, its tiny tongue lapping urgently at the moisture. The crowd had grown quiet, the only sounds the passing desert wind and the occasional click of a camera phone. There was something almost sacred about the moment. Wild and human joined in this fleeting connection on the sun-baked highway. When they had finished drinking, the mother bobcat once again took the leash in her mouth. With renewed strength, she began to guide her cub toward the opposite side of the highway, toward the shelter of a rocky outcropping visible in the distance. Mike and the assembled travelers formed an impromptu protective line across the road, ensuring no vehicles would threaten the bobcat's passage. No one spoke. No one needed to. The shared witnessing of this small drama had created an unspoken bond among them. As the bobcats reached the shoulder of the road, the mother paused. She turned, her golden eyes finding Mike's across the distance. For a brief moment, she regarded him with that same wild, inscrutable gaze. Then she turned away, leading her cub into the scrubland beyond the highway. Mike watched the bobcats disappear into the scrubland, the mother's spotted coat blending perfectly with the dappled shadows of desert vegetation. A strange emptiness settled in his chest as they vanished from sight, a feeling reminiscent of goodbyes he'd experienced throughout his life on the road. "That was something else," said the man in the fishing hat, breaking the reverent silence that had fallen over the impromptu gathering. "Never seen anything like it." Mike nodded, suddenly aware of the sweat soaking his shirt and the heat radiating from the asphalt beneath his boots. The spell broken, reality came rushing back. His delivery schedule, the idling truck, the line of vehicles now stretching behind his rig. "Folks, we should get moving," he announced, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone used to navigating difficult situations. "Wildlife's safe now, and we're creating a hazard." The small crowd dispersed with reluctant nods and murmurs of agreement. Several people paused to thank Mike or shake his hand before returning to their vehicles. The young woman who had observed his technique with the cub lingered longest. "I'm Dr. Eliza Sandoval," she said, extending her hand. "Wildlife veterinarian with Arizona Fish and Game. I was heading back to our field office when I got caught in this backup." Mike shook her hand, noting her firm grip. "Mike Collins, just a truck driver." "Just?" She raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Collins, what you just did, approaching a wild bobcat mother and cub like that, most professionals would have waited for proper equipment. It was either very brave or very foolish, depending on how you look at it." Mike's weathered face creased into a small smile. "My wife would have said it was both. She was always the animal expert between us." Dr. Sandoval glanced at his wedding ring, still present on his finger despite the evident years of wear. "Well, she taught you well. That cub might have lost its paw otherwise." She reached into her pocket and handed him a business card. "If you don't mind, I'd like to follow up on this. We don't often get to document successful interventions like this one." Mike accepted the card automatically, tucking it into his shirt pocket without looking at it. Already his mind was calculating the delay, how fast he'd need to drive to make up lost time, whether he'd need to notify dispatch about the unscheduled stop. "I should get going," he said, gesturing toward his truck. Dr. Sandoval nodded. "Of course, but Mr. Collins..." She waited until he met her eyes. "What you did mattered. Thank you." Those simple words, "what you did mattered," followed Mike back to his truck, echoing in his mind as he climbed into the cab and settled into the familiar seat. When was the last time anyone had said that to him? The trucking company measured him in miles driven and deadlines met, not in moments of compassion or courage. He started the engine and carefully maneuvered the massive vehicle back onto the highway. The line of cars behind him began to move, the temporary community already dissolving as each traveler resumed their separate journeys. In his side mirror, Mike could see the rocky outcropping where the bobcats had disappeared, now just another feature in the vast desert landscape. The CB radio crackled to life. "Lonesome Mike, you still there? Over." He recognized the voice of Terry McPherson, another long hauler who'd been about 20 minutes behind him on the same route. "I'm here, Terry. Just getting back on the road. Over." "Heard there was some wildlife situation. Everything okay?" "Over." Mike hesitated, his hand on the radio. How could he explain what had just happened? The technical details were simple enough. Bobcat, injured cub, fishing line removed. But the rest of it, the look in that mother's eyes, the trust she'd placed in him, the way it had awakened something long dormant inside him. Those things didn't translate easily into the casual shorthand of CB conversation. "All clear now," he finally replied. "Mother Bobcat and cub crossed safely. I'm running about 20 minutes behind. Over." "Roger that. Boss man's not gonna like it. Summit Pass Distribution Center waits for no man, not even wildlife heroes." Terry's chuckle carried through the static. "I'm about 15 minutes out from your position. Want me to tell anyone you're delayed? Over." "Negative," Mike said. "I'll make up the time. Over and out." He replaced the handset and focused on the road stretching before him, its black surface shimmering in the afternoon heat. Summit Pass was still 3 hours away, and Terry was right. They weren't known for their patience with late deliveries. 3 decades of professional driving had taught Mike to separate personal matters from the job, to compartmentalize, to keep moving forward regardless of what lay behind. Yet as the miles began to accumulate once more, he found his thoughts repeatedly returning to the scene by the roadside. The weight of the cub's injured paw in his hand, the surprising softness of its fur against his calloused skin, the fierce, unwavering dedication of the mother, and Catherine, how present she had felt in those moments, as if she had been guiding his hands. The card Dr. Sandoval had given him seemed to burn in his pocket, a small rectangular reminder that the world still held unexpected connections, that his actions could ripple outward in ways he couldn't predict. He'd probably never see those bobcats again, would never know if the cub's paw healed properly or if they survived the harsh desert conditions. Yet somehow, not knowing didn't diminish the significance of what had transpired. At the next straightaway, Mike reached into his pocket and placed the veterinarian's card on the dashboard, where it rested against the small photograph of Catherine he kept there. His wife smiled up at him from the faded print, her eyes crinkled with laughter, her arms cradling a rescued barn owl they'd found injured on their property years ago. "You'd have loved this one, Kath," he murmured to the empty cab. "Mother Bobcat, dragging her cub by some kind of vine. Toughest little pair you ever saw." For the first time in months, speaking to Catherine's memory didn't bring the sharp pain he'd grown accustomed to. Instead, he felt a gentle warmth, as if sharing the story had somehow bridged the distance between them. Mike settled deeper into his seat, his hands finding their familiar places on the steering wheel. Summit Pass was waiting, and he had promises to keep. But something had shifted inside him, like ice breaking up on a frozen river. The road ahead looked different somehow, not just a path to the next delivery point, but a journey with possibilities he hadn't considered in a long time. The Summit Pass Distribution Center materialized like a mirage on the horizon, its massive loading docks and fleet of waiting trucks a stark contrast to the natural wilderness Mike had left behind. He was 32 minutes behind schedule, not catastrophic, but enough to earn a notation in his file. After 3 decades in the business, Mike prided himself on reliability above all else. As he maneuvered his rig into the assigned bay, Mike spotted Hank Morrow, the facility manager, standing with his ever-present clipboard and perpetual scowl. Hank was a numbers man, concerned with efficiency metrics and throughput rates, not roadside wildlife encounters. "Collins," Hank called as Mike climbed down from the cab. "You're running late." "Yes, sir," Mike acknowledged, retrieving his paperwork from the truck. "Had an unexpected situation on the highway." "Accident? Wildlife incident? Mother Bobcat and an injured cub crossing the road. Had to stop traffic until they were clear." Hank's expression didn't change as he took the delivery manifest, checking off items with sharp, precise movements of his pen. "Noble of you. Unfortunately, your delay means we're shuffling 3 other outbound shipments." Mike nodded, accepting the criticism without defense. In the logistics business, every minute counted. Every delay created ripples that affected dozens of other schedules. He understood this reality as well as anyone. "I'll make up the time on the return route," Mike offered. "See that you do." Hank handed back a copy of the signed manifest. Your next load is prepped on Dock 7. We expedited it to minimize further delays. As the distribution center crew began unloading his trailer, Mike headed toward the driver's lounge to grab coffee and log his hours. The lounge was empty except for a young driver hunched over his phone, his regulation cap pulled low over his eyes. Mike nodded a greeting and received a distracted wave in return. He poured himself a cup of the perpetually burnt coffee and sat heavily in one of the vinyl chairs. The adrenaline that had carried him through the Bobcat encounter was wearing off, leaving him feeling every one of his 56 years. He pulled out his logbook and began making the necessary entries, but his mind kept drifting back to the desert highway, to the mother Bobcat's determined eyes. Almost without conscious thought, his hand moved to his shirt pocket, retrieving Dr. Sandoval's card. Her name was printed in simple black letters over the Arizona Fish and Game Department logo, Dr. Eliza Sandoval, DVM, Wildlife Veterinary Services. Below her official information was a handwritten cell phone number. Mike's thumb traced over the embossed lettering. Catherine would have called immediately, eager to learn what happened to the Bobcats, to offer further assistance if needed. But Mike had spent the last 2 years avoiding new connections, new commitments. Each one felt like a betrayal of what he'd lost, a step away from the life he'd shared with Catherine. His phone buzzed, startling him from his thoughts. It was a message from dispatch. His return route had been updated, with an additional stop added near Flagstaff. More hours on the road, more miles between him and any personal entanglements. Usually, this was exactly what he wanted. Today, it felt oddly like running away. Before he could reconsider, Mike pulled out his phone and dialed Dr. Sandoval's number. It rang 3 times before she answered. Dr. Sandoval speaking. "This is Mike Collins," he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. "The truck driver from the Bobcat incident earlier today." "Mr. Collins." Her voice warmed noticeably. "I'm glad you called. I was just filing my report on the encounter." "Report?" "Standard procedure for wildlife interventions. We document everything from location to the animal's condition, actions taken, likely outcomes. It helps us track patterns, improve our response protocols." Mike shifted in his seat, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I didn't realize it was that official." "Wildlife management is mostly paperwork these days," she said with a light laugh. "But in this case, it's paperwork I'm happy to complete. What you did was textbook perfect intervention, minimal handling, addressing only the immediate need, then allowing the animals to continue on their way." "I just did what seemed right," Mike said, uncomfortable with the praise. "That's usually the best approach." There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "Actually, Mr. Collins, I was hoping to ask you a favor." "What kind of favor?" "We've been tracking a small population of bobcats in that area for a conservation study. Based on your description and the location, I believe the mother and cub you helped might be part of our study group. Would you be willing to look at some photos, see if you can identify them?" Mike glanced at his watch. His new load would be ready soon, and the added stop meant a longer drive than planned. "I'm not sure I'd be much help. It all happened pretty fast." "You were closer to them than most wildlife observers ever get," Dr. Sandoval persisted. "And you clearly have good observational skills. It would only take a few minutes." The young driver across the room stood, stretching before heading toward the door. As he passed Mike, he paused, glancing at the business card on the table. "Arizona Fish and Game? You the guy who stopped for those bobcats? Heard about it on the CB." Mike nodded, somewhat surprised that the story had traveled so quickly through the trucker grapevine. "Cool," the younger man said with genuine admiration. "My dad's a wildlife photographer. He'd have given anything to see something like that." He offered a respectful nod before heading out, leaving Mike alone in the lounge. "Mr. Collins, are you still there?" Dr. Sandoval's voice brought him back to the conversation. "Sorry, yes," Mike said. "When were you thinking of doing this identification?" "I'm based at the Sonoran Desert Research Station, about 40 miles west of Flagstaff, if you're ever passing through." Mike's grip on the phone tightened slightly. "Actually, I just got assigned a delivery near Flagstaff. I'll be heading that way tomorrow." There was a brief silence, as if Dr. Sandoval was as surprised by this coincidence as Mike was. "That's fortunate timing. Would you have time to stop by? It really would help our research." The sensible answer was no. Extra stops meant more delays, more explanations to dispatch, more entries in the logbook. But something about the synchronicity of the Flagstaff assignment felt significant, as if Catherine was nudging him from beyond. "I think I could manage it," Mike heard himself say. "Late afternoon, probably." "That would be perfect. I'll text you the exact location." The relief and enthusiasm in her voice was evident. "And Mr. Collins, thank you, not just for this, but for what you did out there today. It mattered." There it was again, that phrase. What you did mattered. As Mike ended the call and gathered his things to check on his new load, those words echoed in his mind, a counterpoint to the efficient but soulless rhythm of the distribution center around him. The following afternoon found Mike navigating his truck along a narrow access road leading to the Sonoran Desert Research Station. His delivery to the Flagstaff warehouse had gone smoothly, and he'd managed to create a 2-hour window before he needed to be back on the main highway. The research station appeared on his right, a cluster of low, sand-colored buildings that blended harmoniously with the surrounding landscape. As Mike parked in the visitors area, he felt a flicker of uncertainty. What was he doing here? This detour was completely outside his normal routine, a disruption to the careful isolation he had built around himself since Catherine's death. For 2 years, he had existed in the liminal space of highways and truck stops, avoiding the messy entanglements of genuine human connection. He sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, tempted to put the truck in reverse and return to the familiar comfort of the open road. Before he could act on the impulse, a figure emerged from the main building, Dr. Sandoval, wearing khaki field pants and a light blue shirt with the Arizona Fish and Game logo. She waved, having clearly been watching for his arrival. With a deep breath, Mike climbed down from the cab, the desert heat enveloping him immediately. He squared his shoulders and walked toward the research station, feeling oddly like he was crossing a threshold that had nothing to do with the physical distance. "Mr. Collins," Dr. Sandoval greeted him, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it." "Mike, please," he said, accepting her handshake. Up close, he noticed details he had missed during their roadside encounter. The sun-lightened streaks in her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, the laugh lines around her eyes suggesting she smiled often, the quiet confidence in her posture. "Eliza," she offered in return, gesturing toward the main building. "Come in out of this heat. I've got everything set up inside." The research station's interior was mercifully cool, the air conditioning a welcome relief after the desert sun. Eliza led him through a reception area decorated with wildlife education posters and into a small conference room where a laptop computer was open on the table. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked. "Water, coffee, iced tea?" "Water would be great, thank you." While she stepped out to get the drinks, Mike took in his surroundings. The walls were lined with maps showing wildlife migration patterns and habitat ranges. A large whiteboard was covered with notations about various research projects, including something called the Sonoran Bobcat Conservation Initiative. Eliza returned with 2 glasses of ice water and settled into a chair beside the laptop. So, our Bobcat research program has been running for about 3 years now, she explained, opening a folder of images on the computer. We've identified approximately 20 individual bobcats in this region using trail cameras and occasional direct observation. She clicked through several photographs. Bobcats drinking at water sources, moving through underbrush, hunting small prey. Based on the location where you encountered the mother and cub and your description of them, I have some candidates I'd like you to look at. Mike leaned forward, studying the screen as she displayed a series of images. The bobcats all looked similar to his untrained eye, but as Eliza pointed out distinctive markings, the patterns of spots, scars, ear notches, he began to see the differences. This one, she said, opening a particular image, is a female we've designated SB07. She's approximately 4 years old and has been documented with cubs twice before. The photograph showed a female bobcat moving through dappled shadow, her amber eyes caught in the camera's flash. Something about her posture, the proud set of her head, struck Mike as familiar. That might be her, he said cautiously. The coloring seems right. Can you show me more angles? Eliza clicked through additional photos of the same bobcat. One image in particular, showing her in profile standing on a rocky outcropping, triggered Mike's memory. Yes, he said with growing certainty. That's her. She had that same watchful look, that same way of holding herself. Eliza nodded, making notes on a pad beside her. What about the cub? We have limited photos of her current offspring, but I can show you what we have. The images of the cubs were fewer and less distinct, often partially obscured by vegetation or distance. But in one night vision trail camera shot, a small cub was visible following closely behind SB07, its movements suggesting the slight limp Mike had observed. That could be the one, Mike said. Hard to tell for sure, but the size looks right. This is tremendously helpful, Eliza said, her enthusiasm evident as she typed additional notes. SB07 is one of our most successful mothers. She's exceptionally adaptive, which is crucial for bobcat survival as human development encroaches on their territory. She turned to face Mike directly. The fact that she was using that plant fiber to guide her cub is particularly significant. We've observed tool use in some of our study subjects, but it's rare and not well documented in wild bobcat populations. Tool use? Mike echoed, surprised. I thought she was just dragging the cub along. It's more complex than that, Eliza explained, her eyes bright with professional passion. What you witnessed was a form of teaching behavior. The mother wasn't just transporting her cub, she was showing it how to navigate a dangerous crossing. The plant fiber serves as both physical guidance and a teaching tool. She pulled up another image, this one showing the same female bobcat with an earlier litter of cubs, one of which appeared to be connected to her by a similar natural tether. We've only documented this behavior a handful of times, she continued. It represents a level of problem-solving and parental investment that challenges some of our assumptions about feliid cognition. Mike studied the image, a new appreciation dawning for what he had witnessed on the highway. It hadn't just been desperation driving the mother bobcat's actions, it had been intelligence, foresight, the determination to teach her young how to survive in an increasingly human-dominated landscape. And the fishing line? He asked. How would that have happened? Eliza's expression grew more somber. Unfortunately, that's an all-too-common hazard. People fish in the seasonal washes and leave behind tackle. The cubs are curious, like any young animals, and get tangled in discarded line. If you hadn't intervened. She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the likely outcome: infection, inability to hunt, eventual starvation or predation. What are their chances now? Mike asked. Eliza considered the question carefully. Bobcats are remarkably resilient. With the line removed and the wound treated, I'd say the cub has a good chance of full recovery. And with a mother like SB07. She smiled. Well, that cub has one of the best possible teachers for survival in our changing world. As they continued reviewing the Bobcat data, Mike found himself genuinely engaged for the first time in years. The research station's quiet purpose reminded him of the nature documentaries he and Catherine used to watch together on Sunday evenings, cups of tea in hand, discussing the wonders of the natural world. "So you've been tracking these cats for 3 years?" he asked, accepting a refill of water from Eliza. She nodded, returning to her seat. "This particular study, yes. But I've been with Fish and Game for almost 12 years now. Started as a field technician right out of vet school." "What made you choose wildlife over a regular veterinary practice? Seems like a harder road." Eliza smiled, her fingers idly tracing the rim of her glass. "I grew up in Tucson. My father was a park ranger, so I spent more time with coyotes and javelinas than with neighborhood kids. When I was 9, a developer bulldozed a patch of desert near our home to build a shopping center. I remember watching jackrabbits and ground squirrels fleeing, having nowhere to go." Her eyes took on a distant look. "That night, my dad found me trying to build little shelters for them in our backyard. He explained that it wasn't that simple, that wildlife needed intact ecosystems, not just shelters. Something clicked for me then. I wanted to be part of protecting those ecosystems." Mike found himself nodding, understanding the clarity of purpose in her story. Catherine, my wife, she had something similar. Grew up on a farm in Minnesota, watched developers turn neighboring farmland into subdivisions. She became a high school biology teacher, but wildlife rehabilitation was her passion. It was the first time in months he'd spoken about Catherine to someone who hadn't known her, and he was surprised by how natural it felt. "She sounds like someone I would have liked to know," Eliza said gently. Then, with careful neutrality, "Is she—" "Cancer," Mike said, the word still hard to form even after 2 years. "Pancreatic. 2 years ago this August." Eliza nodded, offering neither platitudes nor awkward sympathy, just quiet acknowledgement of his loss. The simple respect in her response made it easier for Mike to continue. "She was the one who taught me about helping injured wildlife. Always had some creature recuperating in a box on our porch. Said every living thing deserved an advocate." "She was right," Eliza said. "That's essentially what we're trying to do here. Be advocates for species that can't speak for themselves." She gestured to the wall maps. "We're mapping habitat corridors, documenting how wildlife adapts to human encroachment, gathering data that might influence development decisions." She stood, indicating for Mike to follow. "Let me show you something." They walked through a hallway lined with research posters to a back room equipped with several monitors, displaying live feeds from trail cameras positioned throughout the desert. "This is our real-time monitoring station," Eliza explained. "We have 30 cameras set up in key locations: water sources, known den sites, wildlife crossings. They transmit data continuously, allowing us to observe without disturbing the animals." Mike studied the screens with interest. Most showed empty landscape, but one captured a desert tortoise plodding deliberately across rocky terrain, and another displayed a family of javelinas rooting near a dry wash. "No bobcats at the moment," Eliza said, checking the feeds. "They're most active at dawn and dusk, but this is how we've been able to document SB07's remarkable parenting behavior over the years." She moved to a computer workstation and pulled up a sequence of video clips. "Watch this." The footage showed SB07 teaching earlier cubs various survival skills: how to stalk prey, how to find water in seemingly dry washes, how to use rocky overhangs for shelter. In one particularly striking clip, she demonstrated climbing technique on a saguaro skeleton, then watched attentively as her cubs imitated her movements. "She's an exceptional mother," Eliza said, obvious admiration in her voice. "Most female bobcats are good parents, but SB07 goes beyond instinct. She problem solves, adapts to new situations, passes knowledge to her offspring that they wouldn't normally acquire so quickly on their own." Mike found himself smiling at the footage. "Reminds me of those tiger mothers you hear about with human kids, the ones who accept nothing less than excellence." Eliza laughed. "That's not far off, though I'd say she's firm but fair. She doesn't abandon cubs that can't keep up. She finds ways to help them succeed, like the tether technique you witnessed." She closed the video files and turned to face Mike directly. "Which is why your intervention was so important. That cub might be carrying some of her problem-solving genetics. Every offspring of hers that survives strengthens the local population." Mike hadn't considered this broader implication of his roadside assistance. The thought that his small act might contribute to the resilience of an entire species was both humbling and strangely uplifting. "I was just doing what seemed right in the moment," he said. "That's usually how the most important things happen," Eliza replied. She hesitated, then added, "Actually, I have a proposition for you if you're open to it." Mike raised an eyebrow, curious. "You mentioned you drive this route regularly," she continued. "We're always looking for additional eyes on the ground, people who can report wildlife sightings, especially of tagged or collared animals." She pulled a small pamphlet from a nearby shelf. "We have a citizen science program. Nothing complicated, just an app where you can log observations, location, species, behavior, that sort of thing. It's designed for truckers and other regular road users. The data helps us identify critical crossing points, areas where we might need to advocate for wildlife passages or additional signage." Mike accepted the pamphlet, turning it over in his hands. The front featured a desert landscape at sunset, with the silhouette of a coyote against the horizon. "Highway Habitat Heroes," the title read. "No pressure," Eliza added quickly, "but someone with your observational skills and obvious concern for wildlife would be an asset to the program." Mike's first instinct was polite refusal. His life on the road was streamlined, uncomplicated by commitments beyond his delivery schedule. Yet something about the opportunity resonated with him, a chance to continue what Catherine had started, to be the advocate she had always encouraged him to be. Before Mike could respond to Eliza's invitation, an alert chimed from the monitoring station. One of the screens that had shown only empty landscape now displayed movement, a bobcat emerging from the shadows of a mesquite thicket. Eliza hurried to the workstation, leaning forward to study the feed. "Speaking of our celebrity mother," she said with quiet excitement, "that's SB07. Mike moved closer, his eyes fixed on the screen. There she was, the same bobcat he had encountered on the highway, her distinctive spotted coat unmistakable. She moved with purposeful grace, pausing occasionally to scan her surroundings. And trailing behind her, connected by what appeared to be the same natural tether, was her cub. The little one's walking better, Mike observed, noticing the cub was putting more weight on the formerly injured paw. Still favoring it a bit, but definitely improved. Eliza nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she logged observations. "The antibiotic ointment you applied probably made a significant difference, prevented infection long enough for natural healing to begin." They watched in companionable silence as the bobcat pair navigated toward a small water source. The mother paused at the edge, released her hold on the tether, and demonstrated drinking technique with exaggerated movements. The cub observed intently before mimicking her actions. "She's teaching again," Eliza said softly. "Every interaction is a lesson." Mike felt an unexpected swell of emotion watching the animals he had aided just 24 hours earlier. The cub that might have lost its paw, or its life, was now drinking confidently, learning the skills it would need to survive. His small intervention had preserved this bond, this transfer of knowledge that had been refined through countless generations of bobcat evolution. "I'll do it," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Sign me up for your Highway Heroes program." Eliza glanced away from the monitor, surprise and pleasure evident in her expression. "Really? That's wonderful." "Catherine would have wanted me to," Mike said, then corrected himself. "No, that's not quite right. Catherine would have already been doing it herself. But I think," he paused, finding the words, "I think it's what I want to do too." Eliza's smile deepened, reaching her eyes. "I'll get you set up with the app before you leave. It's simple to use, designed not to distract drivers." As they turned back to the monitor, they saw the Bobcat family had moved on, disappearing once more into the desert landscape. But the brief glimpse had been enough, confirmation that Mike's roadside assistance had made a tangible difference. "You know," Eliza said thoughtfully as they walked back toward the conference room, "we've been trying to document cases like this, where human intervention positively impacts wildlife without creating dependency. Would you mind if I included your experience in a paper I'm preparing?" Mike considered this, surprised to find himself comfortable with the idea. "I suppose that would be all right. Not sure what you'd want to say about it, though." "Your approach was textbook perfect," Eliza explained, her professional passion evident. "You assessed the situation, recognized the specific problem, addressed only that issue, and then allowed the animals to continue their natural behavior. Too often, well-meaning people either do too little out of fear or too much out of misplaced compassion." They returned to the conference room, where Eliza helped Mike download the Highway Habitat Heroes app to his phone and walked him through its simple interface. As he created his profile, Mike hesitated over the username field. "Use whatever you like," Eliza assured him. "Many participants prefer anonymity." After a moment's consideration, Mike typed Kath's eyes into the field. When Eliza raised an inquiring eyebrow, he explained, "Catherine always said I borrowed her eyes when it came to noticing wildlife. Seems fitting." Once the setup was complete, Eliza walked Mike back to his truck. The afternoon was waning, the desert preparing for the dramatic color show that accompanied sunset in this region. Mike knew he should be getting back on the road if he wanted to make his next checkpoint before the mandatory rest period, yet he found himself reluctant to leave. "I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come here," Eliza said as they reached his truck. "Your observations have added valuable data to our study." "Glad to help," Mike replied, meaning it. "This place, what you're doing here, it's important work." "It feels that way most days," she agreed. "Though sometimes it's hard to see the impact when you're drowning in grant applications and regulatory paperwork." Mike chuckled, understanding all too well how bureaucracy could obscure purpose. "I imagine so." There was a moment of silence, neither quite ready to end the conversation. Finally, Eliza reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card, different from the official one she'd given him at their first meeting. This one had her personal cell number handwritten on the back. "The app has a support contact for technical issues," she explained, handing him the card. "But if you ever spot SB07 or her cub specifically, or if you have any questions about wildlife you encounter, well, I'd be interested to hear directly." Mike accepted the card, tucking it carefully into his shirt pocket alongside the first one she had given him. "I'll keep an eye out," he promised. As he climbed into his truck and started the engine, Mike felt lighter somehow, as if something long constricted had begun to loosen within him. The road ahead was the same one he had traveled countless times before. Yet it looked different now, less a means of escape and more a path of connection. He adjusted his mirrors, catching a final glimpse of Eliza standing in front of the research station, hand raised in farewell. Beyond her, The desert stretched vast and intricate, home to countless hidden lives like SB07 and her cub, lives that intersected with human existence in ways both challenging and redemptive. Over the following weeks, the Highway Habitat Heroes app became a regular part of Mike's routine. What began as a simple promise to help with Eliza's research evolved into something more meaningful, a way of seeing the world around him with renewed attention, a perspective that had been dormant since Catherine's passing. His first official observation came 3 days after leaving the research station, a family of pronghorn antelope grazing near a highway overpass. He pulled safely to the shoulder, logged the sighting with a quick photo, and added notes about their behavior. The simple act of documentation made him feel connected to something larger than his delivery schedule. As September gave way to October, Mike's observation list grew. Coyotes trotting along arroyos, hawks perched on telephone poles, a Gila monster crossing a back road with prehistoric deliberation. Each entry was a small act of witness, acknowledging the wild lives that continued alongside the human highways that carved through their territory. He found himself looking forward to the automatic replies that sometimes followed his submissions. "Thanks for documenting this critical wildlife corridor," or "Your observation helps us track seasonal migration patterns." Occasionally, he'd receive a personal note from Eliza herself, especially when his routes took him near the territories of their research subjects. "Spotted your javelina family again today," she texted one evening. "Third time this month in that location. Considering adding a new camera station there based on your consistent reports." These brief exchanges were professional, focused on the wildlife, yet they provided a human connection that had been missing from Mike's life. He found himself planning routes that would take him past known wildlife hotspots, not just for the research, but for the quiet satisfaction of sharing his observations with someone who valued them. One morning in late October, Mike was driving a less traveled state highway when movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. He slowed the truck, eyes scanning the roadside brush. There, a flash of spotted fur, the distinctive silhouette of a bobcat. He pulled safely onto the shoulder, reaching for his phone with practiced ease. Through the windshield, he spotted not one but 2 bobcats moving through the scrub. The larger one paused in a patch of sunlight, and Mike immediately recognized SB07's distinctive coat pattern. Behind her followed the cub, noticeably larger than when he'd first encountered them, moving with confidence on all 4 paws. With careful movements to avoid startling them, Mike opened the app and documented the sighting, adding detailed notes about the cub's improved mobility and apparent health. His finger hovered over the submit button, then shifted to his messaging app instead. This observation felt too personal for the anonymous database. "Just spotted SB07 and cub about 30 miles east of your station," he texted Eliza. "Cub looking strong, no sign of limping. They're heading north through Thompson Wash." Her reply came moments later. "Fantastic news. We haven't had a confirmed sighting of them in over a week. This helps us map their territory. Thank you, Mike." He watched the bobcats until they disappeared into the desert underbrush, feeling an unexpected sense of pride in their resilience. In his decades on the road, he had witnessed countless roadkill victims, the unavoidable collision between wild instinct and human infrastructure. But here was a success story, proof that coexistence was possible with just a small measure of human compassion and attention. That evening, during his mandatory rest period at a truck stop outside Tucson, Mike found himself scrolling through his growing catalog of wildlife observations. The collection had become a visual journal of his recent journeys, far more meaningful than his standard logbook of miles and deliveries. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Eliza's name appeared on the screen. They had exchanged occasional texts about wildlife sightings, but this was their first call since his visit to the research station. "Hope I'm not interrupting your evening," she said when he answered. "Not at all. Just reviewing my wildlife notes." "That's actually why I'm calling. Your consistent reporting has been incredibly valuable, especially the regular updates on SB-107 and her cub. I've been compiling data for our quarterly research publication, and your observations fill important gaps in our monitoring coverage." Mike felt a modest pride at her words. "Happy to help. Gives me something worthwhile to look for on these long hauls." "Well, I have a proposition for you," Eliza continued. "We've received funding for an expanded study on wildlife corridor usage. Part of the grant covers stipends for citizen scientists who commit to regular, structured reporting. Given the quality and consistency of your observations, I'd like to offer you one of those positions." Mike's first instinct was hesitation. His job already consumed most of his time, and formal commitments had felt overwhelming since Catherine's death. Yet something about this opportunity resonated differently. "What would it involve exactly?" he asked. "Nothing much beyond what you're already doing," Eliza explained. "Just more structured reporting, following specific protocols for certain species of interest. We'd provide enhanced training, better equipment for documentation, and as I mentioned, there's a modest stipend." "I don't need the money," Mike said automatically. "Then perhaps consider it research funding," Eliza suggested. "You could use it for better cameras, spotting scopes, whatever tools would help you gather better data, or donate it back to conservation efforts. The important part is your participation." Mike considered Eliza's offer for several days, weighing it against the careful simplicity he had constructed in his life since Catherine's death. The trucking company had just offered him a new route, longer hauls with more days on the road but better pay. Taking on a formal role with the research project would require commitment, structure, perhaps even occasional deviations from his optimized driving schedules. Yet each time he encountered wildlife on his routes, a desert tortoise lumbering across a back road, a great horned owl perched on a highway sign, he felt the quiet satisfaction of bearing witness, of acknowledging these lives that continued, despite the human infrastructure cutting through their world. He thought of Catherine, how she would have embraced this opportunity without hesitation. On a crisp November morning, Mike called Eliza while parked at a rest stop outside Flagstaff. "I'd like to accept your offer," he said when she answered, the decision feeling right as soon as he spoke it aloud. "But I should be clear about my limitations. My schedule can be unpredictable, and I can't promise to be available for anything that would take me off my routes." "We understand completely," Eliza replied, her voice warm with genuine pleasure. "The value you bring is precisely your regular presence on those highways. Most of our researchers can only visit these areas occasionally, but you're traveling through these wildlife corridors every day." They arranged for Mike to stop by the research station the following week for orientation and to pick up enhanced observation equipment, a high-resolution camera with telephoto lens, a compact spotting scope, and a tablet with specialized software for detailed data entry. "We'll officially introduce you to the team," Eliza added before ending the call. "Everyone's eager to meet the truck driver who saved SB-07's cub." The casual mention of the team startled Mike. He had been thinking of his wildlife reporting as a solitary activity, an extension of his existing isolation rather than an entrance into a community. The prospect of meeting others, of being known for something beyond his reliability as a driver, stirred a complex mix of anxiety and anticipation. When Mike arrived at the research station the following week, he was surprised to find several vehicles in the parking area. Inside, the previously quiet facility hummed with activity as researchers and staff moved between workstations and conference areas. Eliza greeted him with a warm handshake and introduced him to the assembled team: wildlife biologists, habitat specialists, GIS technicians mapping migration patterns, and several other citizen scientists who contributed observations from different regions. "And this is Mike Collins," she said as they completed the circle of introductions, "our highway corridor specialist who provided that crucial intervention with SB-07's cub that we've all been following." Mike felt a flush of self-consciousness at becoming the center of attention, but the genuine appreciation in the team's response eased his discomfort. These were people who understood the significance of what he had witnessed and done, who valued the same things Catherine had taught him to value. After the introductions, a young wildlife biologist approached Mike. "Dr. Sandoval showed us the camera trap footage from last week," he said. "SB-07's cub is thriving, growing faster than we typically observe. Your intervention made a real difference." Throughout the orientation session, Mike found himself drawn into discussions about wildlife behavior, habitat fragmentation, and the challenges of conservation in developing areas. He spoke little, preferring to listen, but when he did share observations from his decades on the road, the team listened with genuine interest. "You've seen changes we can only document through historical research," a habitat specialist noted after Mike described how certain migration patterns had shifted over his years of driving the same routes. "That kind of longitudinal observation is invaluable." By the time Eliza walked him through the technical aspects of the new equipment, Mike felt something unexpected, a sense of belonging. These researchers, with their advanced degrees and specialized knowledge, had welcomed his practical experience without condescension, incorporating his observations into their understanding of the complex ecosystems they studied. As the session concluded, team members exchanged contact information for their various project areas. Mike found himself with several new numbers in his phone, specialists he could alert for different wildlife situations he might encounter. "The rubber meets the road with observers like you," said the GIS specialist as they exchanged information. "All our mapping and modeling means nothing if we don't know what's actually happening out there." Before Mike departed, Eliza showed him one last piece of equipment, a small specialized camera trap. "This is a bit of an experiment," she explained. "It's designed for temporary deployment. If you ever spot SB-07 or other study subjects in an area without permanent monitoring, you could set this up for a few days. It transmits data automatically when it detects movement, and you can retrieve it on your next pass through." She demonstrated how to secure it to a tree or post, adjusting its angle for optimal coverage. "Only if it's convenient, of course," she added. "Your primary value is still your observations while driving." Mike accepted the device, careful to note its proper handling. "I'll keep it in the cab. Never know when it might be useful." As he prepared to leave, Eliza walked him to his truck. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the research station grounds, and a cool breeze carried the scent of juniper and sage. "Thank you for doing this," she said as they reached his vehicle. "Not everyone understands the value of this work. Most people drive through these landscapes without ever really seeing what lives there." "Catherine used to say something similar," Mike replied, the memory bringing warmth rather than pain. "She'd say, 'The world is full of wonders hiding in plain sight. All you have to do is slow down enough to notice them.'" Eliza smiled. "She sounds like she was a remarkable person." "She was," Mike agreed, realizing that speaking about Catherine had become easier, that sharing her wisdom with someone who appreciated it felt right. "This project, it feels like something she would have loved." "Then I'm doubly glad you're part of it," Eliza said. 4 months after joining the wildlife monitoring program, Mike's truck cab had transformed. A spotting scope sat secured in a custom mount beside the passenger seat. The tablet with specialized tracking software was installed on a dashboard holder. A small cooler contained water bottles, not just for himself now, but as a preparedness measure for any dehydrated wildlife he might encounter. The transformation of his workspace mirrored the subtle changes in himself. February in the desert brought cool mornings and spectacular sunsets. Mike had adjusted his schedule where possible to drive during daylight hours, maximizing his observation opportunities. His log now contained over 200 documented sightings, including several that Eliza had flagged as particularly valuable for the research project. The trucking company had noticed his new interests as well. After an initial period of mild friction over schedule adjustments, management had recognized the public relations value of his conservation work. A small article in the industry newsletter had highlighted Mike's role in the citizen science program, positioning the company as environmentally conscious. His dispatcher now occasionally routed him specifically to check areas where wildlife activity had been reported near highways. On a crisp Thursday morning, Mike was driving a secondary road that paralleled a known wildlife corridor when his radio crackled. "Mike, you copy." It was Eliza, using the dedicated channel they had established for urgent wildlife communications. "I'm here," he responded, immediately alert. "What's happening?" "We've lost signal from SB-07's tracking collar. Last transmission came from near Thompson Wash, about 5 miles ahead on your current route. Any chance you could take a look?" Mike checked his schedule. He was running ahead today, with a cushion of nearly an hour. "I can do that. Any specific concerns?" "Probably just a battery failure or transmission issue, but worth checking. She's due to have her new litter soon, and we're hoping to document the denning location." The news surprised Mike. "New litter? Already?" Bobcats typically breed again after their cubs become independent. Her previous cub, the one you helped, should be nearly self-sufficient now. "I'll check it out and report back," Mike promised. As he approached the coordinates Eliza had provided, Mike slowed his truck, eyes scanning the landscape with practiced efficiency. Thompson Wash cut a sandy path through the desert, its banks lined with cottonwoods and mesquite that provided natural cover for wildlife. Mike pulled onto a wide shoulder and gathered his equipment, camera, water, and the small first aid kit he now carried routinely. After securing his truck, he made his way carefully toward the wash, moving with the quiet deliberation he had learned from months of wildlife observation. The wash was dry this time of year, its bed a ribbon of sand marked with the tracks of various desert inhabitants. Mike followed its curve, camera ready, scanning for any sign of SB-07. The February sun cast sharp shadows among the vegetation, creating natural hiding places for wary predators. After about 15 minutes of careful progress, Mike paused, sensing rather than seeing a change in the environment. Years on the road had honed his awareness of his surroundings, and something ahead felt different. He lowered himself slowly to a crouching position, using a mesquite tree as partial cover. Then he saw her, SB-07, emerging from beneath a rocky overhang on the opposite bank. The tracking collar was visible around her neck, intact but possibly malfunctioning. She moved with the same purposeful grace he had observed months before, though her form appeared slightly heavier, consistent with Eliza's comment about impending motherhood. Behind her came another bobcat, not a small cub now, but an adolescent, nearly adult-sized, though still bearing the slightly gangly proportions of youth. Mike recognized the formerly injured cub immediately, though the wound that had brought them together was long healed, invisible beneath the healthy fur covering its paw. Mike raised his camera, capturing a series of images with the telephoto lens. The sound of the shutter, barely audible to human ears, caused both bobcats to turn in his direction. SB-07's golden eyes seemed to lock onto his position, her head tilting slightly as if in recognition. For several heartbeats, they regarded each other across the wash, man and bobcat, connected by a moment of intervention months before. The younger bobcat moved closer to its mother, curious rather than fearful. Its healthy condition, its confident movements, its very survival, all testified to the difference that one compassionate action could make. With slow, deliberate movements, Mike set up the portable camera trap Eliza had given him, positioning it to monitor the den site without disturbing its occupants. As he worked, SB-07 watched him with what appeared to be tolerant acceptance, neither fleeing nor showing signs of aggression. When the camera was secure, Mike backed away gradually, maintaining visual contact with the bobcats until distance and vegetation obscured them. Only when he was certain they were undisturbed did he radio Eliza. "Found them," he reported. SB-07 and her cub, though I guess it's not really a cub anymore, both looking healthy. Set up the portable camera facing what looks like a den site under a rock overhang on the east bank of Thompson Wash. "Excellent work, Mike," Eliza responded, obvious excitement in her voice. "That's exactly where we'd hoped she'd establish her next denning location. Good protection, water access when the rains come, plenty of prey species. And you saw the older cub too?" "Still with her," Mike confirmed, walking strong on all four paws. No sign of the old injury. "That's actually unusual and quite significant," Eliza explained. "Typically, the mother would have driven off the previous offspring by now before the new litter arrives. This suggests she's adapted her typical behavior, perhaps because of the cub's earlier injury. We'll need to document this carefully." When Mike returned to his truck, he found himself smiling. The encounter had felt like closing a circle that began with that first sighting on the highway, the desperate mother dragging her injured cub across the asphalt, and now this confident pair preparing for the arrival of the next generation. As he continued his route, the desert landscape flowed past his windows, no longer just scenery to be traversed, but a living community he had become part of in some small way. His observations, his interventions, his presence, all had ripple effects in the complex ecosystem surrounding the human corridors he traveled. That evening, during his rest period, Mike called the number he had been avoiding for months, his daughter Sarah in Minnesota. Their relationship had grown distant after Catherine's death, his grief driving him further into isolation while Sarah had sought connection through her own young family. "Dad?" Her voice carried surprise and a trace of wariness. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he assured her. "Better than fine, actually. I've been meaning to call. I've got some stories to tell you, about bobcats and research scientists and finding new purpose. And I was thinking, if the offer still stands, I might take some time off this summer. Come visit you and the grandkids." The pause that followed felt like a bridge being rebuilt, tentative but hopeful. "We'd like that, Dad," Sarah said finally, her voice warming. "And I'd love to hear your stories." As Mike described his encounters with SB-07 and her cub, he realized he was sharing not just wildlife observations, but the story of his own return from grief's isolation, a journey that began with one simple act of compassion on a sun-baked highway when he chose to stop for a mother bobcat dragging her cub across the road.